Jimmy Kempski from Philly Voice. You know, all in the name of journalism. I call him the king of stick figures, but today he basically had to stalk Chris Long and say, dude, can you show me your tattoo? Jimmy, you want to explain what's going on with that there? Hello, buddy.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you guys know the story, but he said that if I think it's before the Super Bowl, if the Eagles won the Super Bowl, he was going to get a tattoo of linebackers coach Ken Flajole. And, Ken Flajole's like a 50, 55-year-old guy. You have to Google him to kind of get an idea of what he looks like. But, it's a funny tattoo for him to get. So I asked him if he'd gotten it yet, because he hadn't up until, the last time we spoke with him, which was back in June. And he did get it. So, you ask a lot of weird questions in this profession. And it's like, can I, and like, where is it? And he pointed to where it was. I said, can I see it? And he's like, no. I said, first I asked if I could take a picture of it. He said, no. I'm like, can I see it? And he goes, no. Okay, have a good one.
Your follow-up tweet, of course, was find him on Twitter at Jimmy Kempski, just like it sounds, JimmyKempski. Related, my job is super weird sometimes. I just love that stuff. That's why we love having you on, Jimmy, because it's not just the X's and the O's and the Jimmys and the Joes. We get tattoo stories as well. So day 2 at training camp. Yesterday, of course, Carson Wentz and his mobility was the big story. What was the story in day 2 for you today?
Yeah, today was their first real practice. Yesterday was just a quote-unquote 10-10-10 practice where the offense will run 10 plays against a defense that just kind of serves as sort of a scout team, and then the defense will run 10 plays, and the offense is kind of serving as just a scout team. So they're not really competing. Whereas today, there's a little more competition, though there's still not a ton to see because they're still not in pads yet. So they're still running around there in shorts. They're not really fully ramped up yet. So at this stage of training camp, they're really just still kind of trying to knock the rust off. For me, it was, all about kind of watching Carson Wentz, which I guess everyone kind of did yesterday too. He did more today than he did yesterday. There was, of course, that erroneous report that he was going to be put on the physically unable to perform list. That was garbage. The Eagles were never considering that at any point. Doug Peterson said yesterday that he has no idea where that report came from, but there was never any consideration to that. And in my view, when Carson Wentz first started practicing back in May during OTAs and minicamp, just across the board, unanimously, all the media people kind of agreed that he was way further along than any of us expected him to be, and I think that kind of holds true even to today. He certainly looks very confident in terms of throwing the football and putting weight on his front foot when he steps into his throws. That wasn't the case back in May. He got better at that as OTAs and minicamp kind of moved along, and now he's throwing with total confidence. I think he's moving around a lot better than he did in June in terms of when he runs and and just agility drills and that kind of thing. I would be very surprised if he did not start week 1. There's going to be questions whether he should play in any of the preseason games. I don't think he will, and I don't think he needs to. And again, like I said, I'd be very surprised if he's not ready to go week 1.
Jimmy Kempski with us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Not to get too behind the scenes, Jimmy, but when something like that happens, that PUP list report and all that stuff breaks, I know it has the regular beat people like shaking their heads like, thanks a lot for making me have to work more for something I already know that's not the case. That's number 1. But then number 2, I guess I'd ask you then, is that like a byproduct of becoming the Super Bowl champion and hoisting the Lombardi Trophy, that you're going to have outsiders just throw something out and the rest of the national media, like lemmings, will follow it? Yeah,
I think there's something to the second point you made where they the Eagles are a high-profile team now. I mean, not that they weren't before, but they're the returning champs, so they're of heavy interest to everyone across the board. So, yeah, I think you're going to see more people interested in covering them, and I think when people put reports out, they know that they're going to get more attention than if you put out a report on, the Chargers.
Pick a team. Pick a team. Say Cleveland.
Cleveland, sure. So, yeah, I mean, there's the target's going to be on them both in terms of media and in terms of teams trying to beat them this year. As far as, you mentioned, having to do more work or whatever, sometimes that works the other way because after a long off season of having, just trying to figure out things to write every day, that kind of thing is welcomed every now and again. We're like, okay, thank you. I don't have to think about what I'm going to write. So not always that bad when a report like that comes out. It didn't make a ton of sense to me initially when I heard that he was going to be put on the PUP list because to me that would indicate that there was some kind of setback, and I think that would be the story as opposed to they're just going to put him on the PUP list. So yeah, I mean it happens, and it was an erroneous report obviously, and he seems to be doing just fine.
Jimmy, this is Ryan here. So I want your thoughts. You put in your article that you had a little talk today with Jake Elliott. And yes, yeah. I am starting off with the kicker because I'll tell you what.
I love it.
I love Jake Elliott, man. I follow him on all the social media platforms. He just seems like I compare him to TJ McConnell with the Sixers. He's just like, this guy is a professional athlete and he's a fan favorite, it seems like. So I want your thoughts on the stability of him this year. And you asked him a pretty cool question about ranking the 3 most stressful kicks that he had last year. So for the listeners out there, talk about that you put in your article, and then also just about him moving forward.
Yeah, he's running unopposed this year in terms of kicker competition. It's just him. He's the only kicker in camp, and he kicked today. He went 7 for 7, all right down the middle. And then after practice, I asked him, about, I told him to rank his most stressful kicks, and I gave him 3 kicks. One, of course, was the Super Bowl kick that put him up by 8. One of them was the 61-yarder, obviously. And then I think there's an underrated kick that he made. It was a game winner against Oakland, which was week 16. And it was cold. That was a night game. That was Christmas night. It was cold. It was like, it was like 10 degrees, something like that. And he drilled that. So, and they needed that game still in terms of, to get the number 1 seed. So there were 3 big kicks. He ranked them Super Bowl, which is pretty obvious. And then he said 61-yarder and then the Oakland kick. And I kind of asked him, well, the 61-yard kick, you're kind of playing with house money there. That's, you're kind of not expected to make that kick. And he goes, yeah, but it was my second game. And he had missed, he had missed the kick, I think, the week before in Kansas City. And I think Jason Peters is going, or maybe it might have been earlier in that game against the Giants. I don't remember. But he missed the kick at some point. And Jason Peters went up to him and said, hey, no more misses. So, I think Jason Peters will can kind of scare you into playing better. And I don't know if that happened with Jake or not, but that's how he ranked him.
That's great. That's really cool that you asked him that. So, I want your thoughts on your opinion on the biggest storyline this year. We talked a little bit about yesterday with John McMullen and Bob Groats from the Delaware County Times, and I'm going to take out for you Wentz and Foles. That battle, Wentz coming off season-ending injury, and I'm taking off them defending the Super Bowl title because obviously that's a big storyline. But what's something that maybe you've noticed very early in the past couple days and just something that you're keeping an eye on as camp progresses and we start getting into preseason and even the opening night against Atlanta?
Yeah, it's a really tough question. Like normally I have, 3 or 4 answers ready to go over that kind of question, and it's weird because they don't, in terms of training camp, they don't have, and I know you said you framed it in terms of the season as a whole, but in terms of training camp, there's no camp battles. The best camp battle that you have in this camp is the third linebacker. All the other starting spots are, pretty much set in stone. You have some competition going on at corner, I guess, or maybe not even competition, but they got to kind of figure out who's going to play where, who's going to play on the outside, who's going to play in the slot. Do they kind of have some kind of matchup system? Matching guys up against specific personnel and posing offenses, like you're going to put like a bigger guy like Rasul Douglas on a guy like Mike Evans of Tampa Bay. You're going to have, maybe Darby match up against a guy like Odell Beckham Jr. to match, quickness or whatever. I don't know exactly how all that's going to play out, but that's something to watch. The defensive line is obviously always going to be of interest because they rely on them so much. To get to the quarterback without the use of blitzes. You need those front 4 guys to be able to get there. And, it's that they brought in Michael Bennett. There's some, some minor personnel changes there. They have Haloti Ngata in there as opposed to, Timmy Jernigan, who's going to be out for a little while. But in terms of, just juicy storylines heading into this season, it's really just is Wentz going to be ready? He kind of took that out of play, but that's what it is. And there really isn't much beyond that, in my view, that's really obvious, storyline to look at.
So I guess that's a good thing, right? I mean, they're set.
Absolutely. From the team's perspective, it's great. I mean, forget like camp battles that I was talking about before. They barely have any. I mean, they don't have any holes.
Right.
The best hole that you can come up with on this team is what? Who's going to be the third safety?
They're sixth receiver and the third safety.
It's crazy how not only they don't have any holes in terms of their starters. Maybe they have a whole week one when Nigel Bradham's out. Maybe there's some concern whether Jordan Hicks can hold up over the course of the season, which is a valid concern. But you just look at their starters on paper, and there are no holes. And then for the most part, even beyond the starters, it is a very, very deep team.
Right, which is a good thing. So I'm trying to find some concerns for us to talk about. There's really no position battles, like you said, which is a really good sign as we're getting into camp. But one thing I guess we can talk about as far as something to keep an eye on that could be a negative is all these guys that are coming off injury. I mean, you mentioned Jordan Hicks, but Jason Peters, Darren Sproles, who, by the way, I got in an argument with a buddy who's a Steelers fan who said, Darren Sproles is 40 years old. He's not going to do anything this year for the Eagles. And obviously I'm defending Sproles, but you have key guys that were out last year, not ended the 2017 season on the Lions IR. So Jernigan, like you said, Graham, a lot of guys that were not part of the Super Bowl picture, and now this year they're playing big roles. If you can maybe discuss some of those names I just threw at you and how that's going to play out.
Yeah, there are a lot of guys that had surgery either during the season and ended their season last year, or had surgery after the season was complete. There was over 10 of them. And you mentioned a bunch of them. Jason Peters looked good in camp. I think he's going to be fine. Darren Sproles has looked good so far. I think he's going to be fine. Jordan Hicks has looked good so far. I think he's going to be fine. But you have those guys that they put on the PUP and the NFI list just before camp started, and they would be Brandon Graham. I think that's a concern. I don't know if he's going to be ready for the start of the season. We'll see. And then you have Alshon Jeffrey. I think the chances that he'll be ready for the start of the season are a little better, although I do think both of them will be ready. We'll see. But, those two guys are obviously key parts, both of the defense and the offense. And then you have some other guys, like we already mentioned, Timmy Jernigan, who's going to be out probably till at least November. And then, to a lesser degree, you have a guy like Chris Maragos, special teams ace, who I think his injury is much more significant. I don't know when he's going to be back, but I wouldn't envision that being anytime soon.
We're spending some time with Jimmy Kempski from PhillyVoice.com. Find him on Twitter at Jimmy Kempski as he joins us here to talk day 2 of the Eagles training camp. And he has an article up right now at PhillyVoice.com, 6 battles to watch. So there may not be battles, but there are deep position battles, like you said, third linebacker. I thought that was interesting, Jimmy, when you brought up the third linebacker, because that to me rings the name Nate Gary, who was the conversion project for them, played safety right in college and was trying to learn the linebacker position and how difficult. Who do you think has the leg up at that third linebacker position?
Well, Corey Nelson's been getting the first crack at first team reps, although the other guys have mixed in there as well. Corey Nelson being the free agent that they signed from Denver this offseason, and Nelson seemed to think that that he was going to be used in Philadelphia, and that's why he signed there. So we'll see about that. And then you mentioned Nate Gary, who was a safety in college, and Jim Schwartz kind of likes those guys. I think first of all, from the linebacker position, the thing that he prioritizes more than anything is ability in coverage. And Jordan Hicks obviously has really good ability in coverage. Nigel Bradham has good ability in coverage. And then Gary, having been a safety in college, he's going to have that coverage in his background. Camus Grugier-Hill was a safety in college. The Patriots began to convert him when he was in their camp. They drafted him in the 6th round, I believe, a couple years ago. They cut him, and the Eagles picked him up off waivers. So that's another guy that was sort of a conversion as well. And Corey Nelson even, all three of those guys are undersized linebackers. They're all, right around 220, 225, something like that. So they're undersized guys, but they can all cover. So that camp battle to me is really black and white. I mean, you're not looking at like different. They're looking at a bunch of players that have all different kinds of skill sets. They all kind of have very similar builds and skill sets, and it's just going to be whichever one emerges as the best of the group that's going to win that job. I do think we kind of make a little bit too much of that spot,
right,
because the third linebacker plays, 30% of the snaps, somewhere in that range. And the slot corners are going to be playing really the Eagles' base defense. You can make an argument as their nickel, because they have the third cornerback in there, roughly 60 to 70% of the snaps. So, yeah, the third linebacker will play and will need to play a lot more if Hicks or Bradham go down. And Bradham, of course, is going to be missing week 1 of the regular season because of his suspension.
But not weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
It's right. So it's important in terms of depth. But as far as the third linebacker position itself goes, really not that crucial a position. I would say it's even less crucial than the first 4 guys off the bench on the defensive line, and then of course the slot corner as well. So there's an argument in my view that you could make that it's like the 15th most important position on the defense.
Right.
But again, it is important in terms of depth if one of those top 2 guys go down. But that is one camp battle to watch. The other one that's kind of interesting to me, maybe not as interesting to other people, is the punter, because he doesn't have competition in camp, and there's only one punter. It's Cameron Johnston.
Right.
And the way that Dave Phipp, the special teams coordinator, kind of phrased that was, well, he's not competing against somebody that's right in front of him in practice every day. He's competing against every other punter or every other second punter in the NFL. So he's got to worry about if he sees some other scrub punter in practice every day and he's beating him, he might feel good about himself, but might not be kind of worried about his job and worried about being as good as he can be. Whereas there's a fear of competing against the unknown. That's kind of the way that Dave Phipp put it. I don't know how much I buy that or not, right. but that's who he's competing against, and he's had kind of a rough go of it, both in spring practices and so far in training camp.
Was that whole situation, I don't think we've talked to you since March, was that whole situation a little bizarre, too, about where Johnson wanted to come? The previous punter is who I'm talking about, wanted to come back, and the way that all was handled, like, no, I'm going to retire. Oh, wait, I want to come back. And they were kind of like, well, we're done with you.
Yeah, Donnie, quote-unquote, retired. And I, say quote-unquote for reason. I don't know how much he wanted to actually retire, but, then he kind of unretired and he was already off the team. And that team, I think the thing with him was he was making more money than they wanted to pay a punter.
Yeah.
And they kind of wanted to go cheap and young there. And for a team that goes for it on fourth down as much as they do, I can kind of get that. And for a team that's as successful on offense as they are, I can kind of understand that they, don't see as much of an importance in a punter as maybe other teams around the league. So I get it, but Donnie Jones clearly a much better punter than the guy they have in there now.
My ears did perk up yesterday, Jimmy, when I guess it was Nick Foles. They asked him about running backs and how Sproles was going to mix in. And he said, hey, that's Doug. Like, I don't handle that. That's Doug. And you write on Philly Voice, like Ajayi, Clement, and Sproles, they're locks. But there are some names behind them. We don't know a lot about Josh Adams. Matt Jones trying to establish himself. There's musical chairs. Again, 4 guys vying for one last spot.
Yeah, unlike the linebackers that I mentioned a minute ago, all those guys do have very different skill sets. So my view, Matt Jones is kind of the closest thing to what they lost this offseason in LeGarrette Blount, in that he's a big back. He's like 6'2", 230 something, and he can run through tackles. His big problem in Washington was that he fumbled a lot, and he got benched, and he never really got off the bench once he got in the doghouse there because of fumbles. Went to Indianapolis for a year, was kind of ineffective, and now he's with the Eagles. And you have Donnell Pumphrey, the guy they drafted in the 4th round a year ago. He was kind of brutal in camp a year ago and made the team, but only because he was a 4th-round pick, and then they kind of IR'd him with a hangnail. Like they termed it as a torn hamstring, but he sat out on IR all year, and he's going to have a chance to make the team again this year. And then Wendell Smallwood, we all know about him. And Josh Adams, who you mentioned, was kind of a Heisman candidate for a little while early in the season in college football last year, running behind that really good Notre Dame offensive line that had 2 guys go, I think, in the top 10. I know Corey Nelson was a top 10 pick. McGlinchey was right around 10. But they had a great offensive line for him to run behind, and he had a really good first half of the season. And then, kind of tailed off a little bit as the season wore on. But he's a bigger back as well who can kind of run through the tackles, can do a little bit outside the tackles. But they made him a priority undrafted free agency signing, as they gave him actually the highest signing bonus, I think it was, in the entire NFL for undrafted guys. So they made him a priority once the draft ended. He'll get a shot to make the team, just like Corey Clement did a year ago when he was an undrafted free agent. So, yeah, they have those three guys that you mentioned that I believe are locks, and then one of those four guys I believe will emerge as the fourth back.
Jimmy, one more here before we let you go. So you brought up a good point in your article today about Wentz and Ertz, how they can really, if they keep the pace up that they did last season, that they could go down as the best duo in NFL history. So I want you to touch on that real quick before we part ways, as expectations and predictions for that duo this upcoming season, not only as quarterback tight end, but just quarterback receiver in general. I mean, they really lit it up last year. And do you expect, how much improvement as we get into this season?
Yeah, statistically, to be clear on that, the best quarterback tight end duo statistically in terms of career catches between the quarterback and tight end, yards, touchdowns. Because nobody's ever going to top, well, not ever, but nobody's going to top. I mean, Carson Wentz and Zach Ertz aren't going to top Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski, in my opinion. But those two guys just didn't play long enough to kind of rack up big stats like that. But within 3 years of each other, they're around the same age. They're close in age. So they've had two good seasons kind of entering prime. Last year, obviously, Wentz was probably going to be the MVP, and he played the entire season. So two of their best players on offense are those two guys, and I think they have a chance to maybe be careers are over. And it's pretty clear that Wentz is his go-to guy. I think Wentz is the biggest weapon in the Eagles offense. Obviously they have Alshon Jeffrey and they have other, weapons like Nelson Aguilar and guys like that. But I think, Ertz is the guy that kind of makes that passing game go in Philadelphia.
Jimmy Kempski with us. We appreciate your time so much for joining us in the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Now, I know you haven't had any stick figures yet, Jimmy, but I did see your great tweet about Jake Elliott taking out the All-22 camera, and they have the trophy underneath the sneeze guard. Like, don't touch it, don't pick it up, don't hold it, don't kiss it. But these are the kind of tweets, Jimmy, that I follow you for, and I urge our listeners to as well, at Jimmy Kempski, and you can read his work on PhillyVoice.com. Thanks, Jimmy. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good day.